What is up? What is up, everybody? It's the Vish Kumaran show, and we got a special Monday night episode here. And I'm very happy to be joined by one of the smartest quarterback analysts I would say I've seen right now writing about football, Mr. QB Class himself, Derek Klassen. What's up, Derek?
Thank you, man. I mean, that is a big praise to be walking into, but I really, really appreciate it. Happy to be here. Always happy to talk about quarterbacks, whichever ones we end up getting to today.
Right. So obviously, I think when I originally reached out to you about doing something of this sort, I wanted to talk to you about the draft quarterbacks and just kind of the conversation surrounding there. But John Lynch, of course, decided to drop a bombshell with us for us in the owners meeting this morning when he talked about, hey, Brock Purdy's in the lead to be the starter for a guy that, is 17 days removed from a severe elbow surgery. Obviously, you don't necessarily cover the 49ers specifically. You cover the league, but you've watched a fair amount of Brock Purdy. I think you wrote a very good article about Brock Purdy last year for Football Outsiders. You definitely have watched a lot of Trey Lance. You charted his complete 289 throws, all of them in college. Where do you kind of stand on either player? I guess I'll throw Sam Darnold into that conversation. And what is your overall outlook of the quarterback room? Yeah.
I mean, in terms of overall outlook, like it's Shanahan, he's going to figure it out. Like I don't have they're going to be a top 10 offense. I think no matter who ends up playing, like it could be Sam Darnold and they'll figure it out. But my take is that with everything you spent on Trey Lance, you give him every opportunity to be the guy. I think you give him as many reps as possible. And if he's still not very good, and because like what we've seen of him in the NFL, like you see the flashes and you see why they traded for him,
Right.
But in very limited action, it's been pretty inconsistent. Especially in terms of like, I think his processing speed is a little slow. Like I think he generally knows how to get to the right areas. He's a beat slower, which is going to happen when you haven't played like real football since you were 19 years old in the FCS. So like he's in a weird spot where he needs reps to get better, but also like the Niners are a Super Bowl caliber team, and it's really hard to give that kind of guy reps. But I still think you give him every opportunity possible. Purdy, I think people really wanted to like Purdy because of the story, but I think in a lot of ways he's kind of just fine. And another like late 20s, like if you were to rank all the quarterbacks, he'd be in like the late 20s, and he's just a guy who Shanahan makes look better than he is because he's not afraid to throw over the middle for the most part. His arm talent is like reasonably good. And he's a pretty good athlete. Like, I think he does provide that over Jimmy. We were talking a little bit earlier before we went live. Like, Purdy can mostly get you a lot of the same things that Jimmy was getting you, but also he can move and he can create a little bit. And like that might scare defenses out of playing man coverage because they know he can run, and that's going to help Shanahan a little bit and stuff. So like Purdy is fine. And I think he could again, like cruise the offense to top 10 because Shanahan is just that good. But I still think you give Trey Lance every opportunity to be the guy.
Yeah, so let's start there with Trey Lance, right? You talked about his process. He gets to the right spot, but his processing speed being a tick slow. The other thing is just the hesitation, right? Like he gets there, it's open right in front of him. For whatever reason, he's just a tick slow in throwing the football. And I call it a hesitation, but we've heard Shanahan specifically when he talks about quarterbacks, he's looking for guys to rip it without hesitation. In fact, I would say one of Jimmy Garoppolo's best qualities is the fact that sometimes it feels like he would throw blind. Just the spots.
Yes.
Like he would just throw it. He would let it go. And it feels like with Trey Lance, and part of it might just be the speed of the game between, the FCS to where he is now. But it seems like he needs a little bit more of that visual confirmation right now before he's letting the ball go. Obviously, you've studied a hell of a lot of quarterbacks. Can you give me examples of like different guys that you've seen where when they start off playing, you like their overall process, right? It's not like this is Zach Wilson where you don't know why he's looking at a backside isolated route, like that is his first read when, their concept's over here. Like he seems to be generally looking in the right spots, but can you remember quarterbacks that, it might've just been a hesitation thing. They weren't letting the ball go. I mean, we have a 4-game sample size on a guy, but just as an example of something that you would compare it to.
I mean, I think Cam was a little bit like that actually. And I think part of that was just going from like the offense he was running at Auburn to what he was running by his like second and third year in the NFL. Cause like his first year, they did do a lot of the college-ish type stuff. And it was a lot of like trying to ease him in. And then I think by his second and third year, you really saw like a different he was like a real deal pocket passer by that point, Cam. Obviously it took a little time, but like that should be kind of the game plan with Trey Lance. I think Ryan Tannehill was actually in a pretty similar boat in Miami. I mean, like they were even threatening to bench him at one point. Like
Right.
I think they might have for Matt Moore. I remember really hating Joe Philbin for that because I thought Tannehill was good. But Tannehill, I think, was another one where like he had some issues where like clearly had the arm talent. When he did rip it, it was incredible. But like there would just be these moments where he would get there and just like he would freeze. And you kind of saw some of it at Texas A&M. You saw some of it early and Miami. And then eventually he got to a point, you know, especially by his Titans career, where he was just like, screw it. I'm going to throw kind of like you mentioned with Garoppolo. Like he'll throw blind if he has to, because he just knows he has a cannon of an arm. And that offense is, if it's run well, that offense is more often than not going to open up the blind throw for you anyway, which I think is the hurdle that Trey Lance has to get over. Because like it is kind of a mental thing, I think, in some aspects with that offense, like because it's so timing based, it's so rigid, and you do kind of have to throw blind in a lot of these scenarios. You do have to kind of have that just confidence of like, the coach says it's going to be there. If I throw it enough times, eventually I will learn that it's going to be there. And like, I think, you know, like I said, Tannehill got over it. I think basically all the quarterbacks that play well in this offense have to get over it. Matt Ryan, I think, kind of did. You know, obviously he was a really good processor to begin with.
Right.
But I think when he got into that offense in Atlanta with Shanahan, he really had to get over like, okay, you really just have to throw it like no matter what.
Right.
And he did. So I think that's really like the biggest hurdle for Lance.
And I think with the timing, like if we're going to take the Garoppolo example first, like I think this is where Purdy is maybe a tad different, because Garoppolo is actually late, like probably 60% of the time. Like he's late. It's just that his release is so otherworldly that it makes up the time, right? Like he is late throwing the football. Whereas Purdy, when he first started, and you look at the Miami game or you take the Tampa Bay game, he was playing probably as quickly in terms of playing on time and on schedule and letting the ball go as we had seen any Shanahan quarterback. I thought, you know, overall 7-game stretch, I mean, it's close because Garoppolo had some good stretches, but I thought when you throw in his athleticism, the fact that he didn't make as many stupid mistakes as Garoppolo, I thought he did probably have the best stretch a Shanahan quarterback has ever had. Now, I agree with you. I think the story played into that too, because not only was he playing great, he's this 7th-round rookie and all of that. But I do think there was a little bit of a slippage by the time we got to the end of the season and the playoffs in exactly what I'm talking about in terms of him playing more, I guess, similar to Garoppolo, where there were open throws that he would pass up and we just didn't know why he wasn't making. Best example is, so I don't know if you know, a good friend of mine, Rich Madrid, on Twitter, does great film stuff with the 49ers. So he posted a small thread earlier this week of Purdy and basically a couple of throws that he didn't make versus the Raiders, right? That he just had open. Why didn't he make them? We don't know. We're not there. We're just wondering why he didn't make them. One of them was, 2-minute drill. Niners love taking shot plays where they'll run like a 15-yard 7-stop. They call it swirl routes. They'll run both of them mirrored on either side. And then one is basically they'll have a flat. So one is a high-low. I'm pretty sure they always read the swirl to flat. So whichever side the flat's on, I think that's the first read on how they read it out. I'm not 100% sure. But the reason this example is important is because he is versus cover 2 against the Raiders. He has the swirl route open. He looks at it, and then he throws the flat for a 5-yard gain. I posted an example in response to it against the Bucs game 5 games earlier, where the Bucs end up having a late cover 6 rotation, and he rips the swirl route to the cover 2 side. It's almost the same exact look. One, he throws the ball. One, he doesn't. And I thought that small microcosm was kind of an example of, hey, over the course of the season, though this guy played very, very well, he wasn't doing some of the little things that he did at the beginning that may have made you more excited. And that's where I was perhaps a little reluctant, now that you throw in the injury, to make the resounding statement John Lynch made today. And that's that, he's the quarterback and he's the starter, just because I felt like there was maybe a little bit of room to grow there, but it looks like John Lynch doesn't agree. What do you think of that?
I mean, I still think he has a lot of room to grow. But I think that's an interesting point that he kind of stopped pulling the trigger on some of that stuff and stopped playing within the offense so much, because I think it was kind of a double-edged sword, like we talked about. Like, I think the fact that he was willing to go outside of the pocket and kind of break the offense, like Shanahan was probably losing his mind, but I think in some sense it's kind of good for the offense. And in some sense, it's why they drafted a guy like Trey Lance who can do that. Like, the idea is that you just have a guy who, for as perfect as the offense is, sometimes you just need a guy who's going to break it. But I wonder if Purdy just got to the point where, like, after he had played so well for like 5 weeks or whatever, had firmly entrenched himself as the starter with Jimmy not coming back, all that stuff. I wonder if there was just a level of like, kind of felt like he was playing with house money, whereas at first he kind of wasn't. So it was very much like chop, chop, do the offense. Because like you said, like when he was first playing, ball was out when his back foot hit. Like he was instantly getting the ball out. And he was playing fairly well in that area. And that's kind of why his whole evaluation is weird, because that like first half-ish of games he played were very much like that. The second half was a lot more of the creation stuff, and it looked good, but it was also like a lot more volatile, and I think kind of led to some of their problems toward the end. So I guess I guess theoretically, if you can find the balance, that's good for him, but I think he still probably needs the
playoff games, right? The Dallas first half, the Seattle first half. Great examples of him not trusting the offense as much as he should have. Second halves, he does. Offense just moves that much smoother. And I think it could be the point you made, right? Like he could have just, go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to say too, like with the Dallas game, I think another big thing with him is like, I don't think he's the most inaccurate guy, but he really is not. I think that is one area where I think I would probably give Jimmy a pretty firm edge, is like Jimmy is very like, he's going to hit guys right in stride and they're going to be able to take the ball and do whatever they want with it. Purdy, for as much as he was throwing on time, especially early on, like I just didn't think the accuracy was quite there. And like, it was still good enough because when you're throwing to like 3 all-pros basically, or 4, however many they have, and the offense, constantly has guys open, it helps a little bit. But like, that was probably the one area where I really actually want to see him clean things up. And like, if he can, they might be looking good, but we'll see.
I think it's because Jimmy is just the more accurate thrower.
Yeah.
I think Purdy, when he's on time and on schedule, can be equally as accurate. In fact, I feel like, for example, Garoppolo has ball placement issues, right? And the issue with talking about quarterback accuracy is a lot of people immediately equate it to the guy can't throw to a stationary target at a spot. But Jimmy Garoppolo is probably hitting bullseye 10 times out of 10 if you ask him to throw to stationary parts, right? The tricky is when they're moving the timing.
Yes. I think the biggest issue with Jimmy to me is not necessarily hitting moving targets. It's like he has no understanding of how to throw around defender leverage. Like if there's a guy that's like squeezing for like a certain window in a certain way, he doesn't know how to like put the ball on the back shoulder the way he needs. Like he just has no, or if like a linebacker is like, or a safety is like crashing down on a stationary route, he doesn't know to leave it a little bit low so that your guy can like hunch over. Like he just has no like concept of how to change. He has no concept of how to adapt his accuracy. But if the throw is open, like he's gonna hit it exactly where it needs to be, and it's gonna be perfect.
Right, and then sometimes he could be late, which causes him to be behind. Which we talked about
because he's throwing to the same spot, but he's late
every time, right? But and so that's where I think with Purdy, like overall, you're right. Like when he played on time and on schedule, actually, I thought the accuracy was better than Garoppolo. But when he was improvisational, you could see that at times he would just flat out miss throws that Garoppolo just wouldn't miss. And so that's where I think it's interesting. I think Taylor Broussard here from the chat asked a really, really good question about him getting better. The processing and accuracy is what Shanahan is seeking. Improvisation and playmaking can keep the offense on track, and avoid negative plays is what he means. What do you think of just kind of the improvement track, right? Because the buzzword with Trey Lance is always ceiling, because you see the immense potential, not only physically, but he's supposed to be off the charts in all categories mentally. That's what they say. So when you look at somebody like Brock Purdy, obviously ceiling becomes very, very difficult to talk about with quarterbacks, because what about their ceiling is actually attainable? What is their actual ability to grow to their ceiling? All of that stuff you and I can't necessarily know. But what would you say in the little you've seen?
I mean, he definitely can get better. I think it's 2 things. I think it's it does go back to like ceiling and tools, and like in terms of like quarterback athleticism, he's probably like a B-. Like he's not necessarily part of the designed run game, but like he can move enough to where like it's a problem that you have to think about defensively. Kind of like Heineke or something. Like you're not going to run him that much, but you have to think about him getting outside the pocket.
Right.
And then his arm is like good, maybe very good, but it's not quite in that like Matthew Stafford, like Kyler Murray, like Aaron. It's not quite in that elite tier, which like that's what you're looking for, where like if Lance is really like playing at a high level, that is theoretically where his arm can get to, like that top 7 range. So I do think like his ceiling, when you think about it that way, is just lower than Lance's. So that's why I frame some of the development stuff that way. But also, it's just like the truth is like he was the last pick in the draft for a reason. You know what I mean? Like for as well as he played, like guys who have played, I think especially with Purdy, like he played for 4 years and we kind of saw him just get worse over the course of 4 years. And I think that hurts, where it's like I like to look at guys who like very clearly get better. Like Lamar got better as a passer in college. And that to me was like, okay, that speaks to he's going to get better and better as he goes on.
In a pro-style system in too.
Yes. That's a whole nother like
we can start that another time.
Yeah. Because I will rant about that a lot. But yeah, I think it's also just like pedigree does like matter for as stupid as it is. Like a first round pick is super talented, and like more often than not, they're going to be able to develop at a higher rate and like to a higher level than a 7th round pick. And like you kind of just have to bake that in with Purdy. And like for as well as he played early on, like he still is not one of these guys who had a lot of pedigree and has insane tools. So like I think he can get better. It's definitely not out of the question. Like it's just different from Lance is I guess the way I would put it.
I agree with you. Ultimately, to me, when we're talking about ceiling, and I'm sure we'll delve into this conversation more when we get into draft quarterbacks, but I look at basically traits as what are your opportunities to be elite? Like to me, the one constant with every elite NFL quarterback is that there's a few things about their game that are so elite that it mitigates everything else about their game, right? Like, so we can set Mahomes aside because he's kind of perfect.
He's cheating.
Yeah, he's cheating. But like Burrow, for example, right? His superior movement within the pocket and his ability to play with superior anticipation and timing makes up for the baby arm Burrow allegations, right? Because the arm isn't very good. Like if we're talking like versus someone like Purdy, Burrow's arm, I wouldn't say is that much stronger than a Brock Purdy, and Burrow is.
I might even say Purdy has a better arm, to be honest.
You could make the argument.
Burrow is just, to your point, so insane at everything that it's like kind of makes up for it.
Yeah. And so like I do think there's a path also for Brock Purdy where there's parts of his game that can truly become elite and he could also become a great quarterback. Like I think this is fair. Purdy can get better. I think the reason I draw the distinction between the first half of the year and the second half of the year is because I think the player he was at the first half of the year is the player I project as that could be where something elite about his game. If he's so elite at knowing where to go with the football, getting it out on time and playing on time and on schedule and keeping this offense on time and schedule, then yeah, you can't argue with any of his production because this offense will score 40 points with Shanahan and all of these weapons. Like Brock Purdy is inarguable. Now, if he's playing a little bit more of where, hey, I'm going to run out the backside of the pocket here. I'm not going to make this throw and I'm going to run a little bit. And he's starting to improvise like he did in the second half of the season. That's where I do feel like that's where it does hurt his potential, because to me, there's a lot of negative plays that didn't occur last year that occurred a lot at Iowa State, to be frank, occurred a lot at Iowa State that could happen again. And so that's where, like, I'm not opposed to this idea that Purdy can't get better. Like, even with the pedigree, I understand what you mean by the pedigree, because it does mean something, but I don't mean it means everything. I do think there's a possibility he can get better, but I think there's a very, very specific way to me that Brock Purdy becomes an elite quarterback. And that's why I think we put a definition on that ceiling, because Trey Lance can be multiple different archetypes of an elite quarterback because he has talent in multiple different areas. Now, none of those areas could end up being like elite, and he might never be that, but there's just more opportunities for him to be that, right? Whereas Brock Purdy has this specific prototype that I think he needs to be. And when he was that player, I thought he was great, actually, for the first part that he started. I mean, the way he played in the Miami game, the way he handled the zero pressure, knowing where to go with the ball constantly, coming in like on ice, that was pretty fantastic for a young 7th round pick quarterback. But then as it went on, it maybe wasn't as clean as it was at the beginning of the season. And if he's the player that he was perhaps playing like at the end of the season, I don't think that player necessarily I look at as, oh, he's going to be an elite quarterback, you know, a couple years from now, or in that projection. And so that's where I think it's a little bit more nuanced than, hey, Purdy's 7th round pick, he can only be this, or Lance's 3rd overall pick, he can be this. I just think that there's a specific archetype for Purdy an eliteness, whereas Lance can be like, yeah.
I think the several archetype points is a fascinating one because like Lance could be the guy who just guns in a bunch of stuff. Like he just has an incredible arm. He could be, it could
Right.
be with his legs. It could be, he actually does really develop as a like processor and like becomes, some mix of all of those stuff. Whereas like kind of to your point with Purdy, like Purdy kind of has to be like Tony Romo or like that. Like that's the path to him being that kind of quarterback. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like Tony Romo also undrafted, but it's like how many of these guys that are like that range of talent develop the mental acumen, like from coming from nothing, basically, in terms of like capital and stuff, to being like one of the best processors in the league. I think it's a very, it's possible, but there's like one of these guys every 15 years, and like maybe Brock Purdy is yours, but it's just that's why it feels tricky. Whereas,
and then the injury throws a massive wrench into it, right? That's the
Yes.
conversation that we're not even having, where the guy is coming off of a very serious injury. And for what it's worth, I know we're just going to be really sticking to the quarterbacks and not necessarily get into why John Lynch said this or all of that. But that's where John Lynch making that comment somewhat definitively today kind of shocked me. I think we all were kind of aware that this is how the 49ers were leaning. I mean, it's not hard to read the writing on the tea leaves. Like it's been kind of told to us this way, but for them to confirm that when he's 17 days removed from that severe of a surgery, to me was a little bit surprising.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised. And my thing is, I think Shanahan really runs everything there, so I don't know how much I'm going to listen to John Lynch.
Right. I agree with that. We'll find out tomorrow.
Lynch is not like, he realizes that this should be a Super Bowl team. And so for him to like immediately kind of go out and be like, this is who we think should be the quarterback of that Super Bowl team. It's like, okay, that does mean something and is a little bit surprising to me. It could be typical like Shanahan like doghousing his players again and doing it with Lance to like, because I think Shanahan is very much like a tough love. Like that's how his whole shtick kind of works. I think eventually players come around, but like sometimes they don't. And maybe Trey Lance doesn't, and maybe he hasn't yet. And I don't know. Maybe that's like part of their calculation here.
So let's talk about Trey Lance, right? Like we touched on him briefly. You talked about how we agree he gets to the right spot. There's a little bit of a hesitation in terms of him letting the ball go. Before we get into talking about who he is today, because it's really hard to do that. We have 4 games to do that. It's also hard to talk about him in the past, to be honest. We don't have a lot of throws there either.
4 years ago.
Right. But what was kind of what you saw of him in college at the time? And has his career like played out in any way that you thought this was a possibility when he was coming out of college? Like, what was your, guess of like, hey, Trey Lance is coming out. I kind of think this is what he's going to be.
I mean, up until the injury obviously threw a wrench and everything, I think it was pretty much up to like what I thought was going to happen with him. He was a guy where like, obviously it was really scary because he was only really a 1-year starter. That second year was like he played a game, so whatever. But really only a 1-year starter in the FCS. Like that's obviously a very big leap to go to the NFL. So you were kind of projecting a lot, but like the way I saw it was North Dakota State ran a pretty pro style offense. I mean, like old school pro style where they're like, they're kind of under center a lot. But they ran like real drop back offense. Like it was not one of these like Ole Miss or Baylor or Tennessee. Like it was a real deal. Like they were running real NFL concepts. And so I think what we saw from him in that respect was like, one, I think he was a very good pocket manager. I think he did a really good job of understanding how to like keep his eyes up, stand tall in the pocket, don't bail too early, all that jazz. And I thought for a young player, that was really encouraging. And then I thought with all the NFL type drop sack stuff they were doing, I thought he, for the most part, handled it well. Like he showed the ability to like get to the backside and throw a dig on time. And like, it was still kind of choppy and inconsistent in some ways because he was so young. But like my thinking was just, he's 19 years old, first-year starter, and it already looks this good. It can only get better. Obviously, that is like flawed thinking. It could never get better. I don't know. But my thinking was that because he showed that at that age in that offense, I was like, this should be able to get better, especially if he ended up with in a place like San Francisco. I still thought it would take him a year to acclimate, so I'm actually glad he didn't end up playing, even though, it kind of created this 2-year gap. But I think he probably needed to sit for the most part. And we saw that when he played as a rookie. Like he didn't look all that consistent. He had a couple of plays, but like for the most part, it looked like he needed time. So I'm sad we didn't get that this year, but I think, yeah, like I said, everything I think up to the injury was for the most part what I imagined for him, where he was just this very like he had all of the like packaging and tools of a pro style pocket passer. It just needed a little bit more refinement and time and care. And I think that's different than like having to build a player from the ground up. That on top of him just having a superhero arm and legs was like,
Yeah.
I'm very willing to take the bet on him in the top 5.
And he was, to me, he was one of the hardest quarterback prospects I think I've ever like watched or evaluated, because it was very difficult to put stock into the good and the bad because the sample was so low, right? Like if you have a
Yeah.
statistical sample size of 289 throws and 25 of them are excellent and 10 of them are bad, well, 10 out of 289 is a much bigger percentage than like Trevor Lawrence when it was like, 15 out of 1,400 throws. Well,
Right.
that was also a hard watch because he threw like 80 million screens for a guy with those traits, but that's a conversation, another one for another day. But
Yeah, I could rant on that.
yeah. So it was a very, very complicated thing to me because a lot of people at the time used to, throw out the Josh Allen comparisons. And to this day, I despise the Josh Allen comparisons because I've even gone back and watched Josh Allen in Wyoming a few times just for like confirmation on, and it's like a totally different experience because Trey Lance, on the other hand, you see this guy who's playing within his offense, he's playing within structure. And
Yeah.
then Josh Allen, on the other hand, you see a guy playing in horrible weather with horrible protection, horrible receivers, and every play he just runs out of the pocket and tries to make either the greatest play you've ever seen or the worst play you've ever seen. And oftentimes it was exactly what I described. Trey Lance, on the other hand, there was a consistency, there was a poise, there was actually a lack of recklessness to his game that I
Mhm.
really appreciated because I feel like a lot of these toolsy quarterbacks are Josh Allen, Cam Newton reckless, where they're getting hit all the time. They're constantly trying to overwhelm you physically. It always felt like he was trying to play the right way. It was
Mhm.
just really hard because he was more polished than a guy with his experience should be, but he also had very little experience. And so I never really knew how to kind of weigh the pros and cons between him. And then, of course, the Niners took him when I said that, I don't think the Niners should take him. So then all of a sudden I'm fully like embracing him and all of that. And I actually think like overall, in a lot of ways, he's been like you described, he's been exactly what he was promised to be coming out of school, which is why I don't even know why there should be, just because he cracked his ankle, we're kind of done with him. That's where like he's not necessarily like he was promised to be professional. He's been professional on and off the field. He's promised to be smart. They still say he's very, very smart. Like his arm is as strong as we thought he would be. He's as big as we thought he would be. Maybe he's not as good a runner as they thought, but
That is the one area where like I don't know what it is. I don't know if it was just another thing with him where like kind of like we've talked about with his passing where it's like about seeing it, but like it seemed like he never trusted his eyes as a runner. Like he just at North Dakota State, he would get downhill and kill
right.
you if he really saw it. Like he would just go. It didn't seem like that part of it was there in San Francisco, and I don't know what that was about. I couldn't figure that out for the life of me.
Me neither. A lot of people say the speed is not there, and I used to think that too. Like, oh, he just can't get to the edge in terms of speed. But no, the speed is actually there.
Mhm.
It's just he's not going.
Yes, he's not hitting the accelerator. Like I
Yeah,
don't know what
he's
it
not
is.
going.
Yeah.
I used to think it was. I used to also think. I've gone back and watched. It's not a speed thing. Like this, he can get to the outside. It's
Hmm.
yeah. That's another conversation for another day as well. It's interesting because I think yeah, Coach T in the comments is absolutely right. He's indecisive when he runs.
Hmm. The Arizona game is actually the
Yeah,
one. That's
it's
the
the
one
one
that
I
comes
was
to my
thinking
mind
about.
every time I
Yeah,
think to him having issues of like not just trusting and getting downhill. It's the Arizona game.
100%, 100%. Ultimately, if I had to make you on March 27th make a guess on how you think this 49ers quarterback situation plays out, and what would be your guess?
Um, maybe this is just copium because of like where I rated him, but like I really have a hard time imagining they are not going to give Trey Lance the shot. I know what they said about Purdy, and I know they signed Sam Darnold. Um, but I would have a very difficult time seeing them not give Trey Lance every opportunity to be good. And like it's possible he goes into training camp and is just like completely terrible. But I think if he looks even passable or like where he was supposed to be last year, I think like you invest that much in him, you kind of have to just give it a dice roll.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately fair. I actually have a similar take. It has nothing to do with Lance or Purdy. It just has everything to do with the injury. I don't necessarily prefer the idea of Purdy having no offseason and then just be thrown into the fire of a Super Bowl team and being like, hey, Brock Purdy, save us. Like, I don't know. I think that's a different problem in and of itself that we're not talking about. Shanahan and Lynch have been extremely vehement since the end of the season about Brock Purdy returning for next year. And given the severity of the injury, I don't think it's necessarily fair to just have this expectation that he's just going to walk in and save everything. And I feel like this is a really, really great opportunity because last year you had a plan that was supposed to be executed with Trey Lance. It got fucked because he got hurt. Brock Purdy saved you basically by coming out of nowhere. So your season kind of ended up where it should be. Now I think it's kind of Trey Lance's turn to save you from your plan with Brock Purdy because Brock Purdy's injured.
I had never thought about it that way, but that's a very funny way for this to alter out.
So I do want to add this too, because Taylor Broussard does make a very interesting point too. He says the angles are different. He's not as confident navigating the field with the speed of linebackers and defensive backs. What do you think of that?
I think there probably is something to that because, like, especially it's again coming from the FCS. Like, the level of athlete is very different in the FCS than it is when you're going into the NFL. And so I think there probably is some degree of that. Like, it's not that he doesn't have the athletic ability to do it. It's just that it looks so different for him. And like, he doesn't have the raw, reckless abandon the way that like Carson Wentz did coming out of North Dakota State. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same offense, blah, blah, blah. But Carson Wentz was like, screw it, bro. I will run and I will see what happens. And wherever my body lays, that's where it will lay. I think Trey Lance is a little bit more calculated than that. And maybe to a fault. And, you know, maybe he'll look better next year. Who knows? But I think it's a lot more of that of like, he just isn't confident about what is going to work for him. So he's not necessarily trying it. It's like a very weird, it's a very weird middle ground he's found.
So I said this about him before the draft. It's funny you bring up the recklessness. To me, that's actually a trait. Like, I think it's a trait. I think guys are either reckless or they aren't. And I think there's positives from the recklessness, but there's also negatives from the recklessness, right? The positive is all the Josh Allen off schedule plays that you get. The negative is the turnovers that come with it. And to me, Trey Lance, like, it was interesting because, and I feel like this is a great way to transition to our draft conversation because to me, there's a quarterback that's getting labeled this way in the draft right now. And it's like, oftentimes I feel like draft conversation with quarterbacks basically kind of, it just gets it gets stripped down to like, if the guy is big, he's athletic, and he can run, he can make plays off schedule, off structure. And I hate that conversation because I actually think that's a skill. Like, I think some people have the innate ability in the field to do it and feel where defenders are and all of that, and some people don't. Like, Joe Burrow doesn't have the quintessential skills that we equate with off-schedule quarterbacks. Justin Herbert does. One is clearly better off schedule than the other, and I would say both are pretty good off schedule, but there's a distinct difference, and Herbert would be the traditional guy you would apply the off schedule tag with. Going with that conversation, Anthony Richardson to me is a great example of a quarterback that I think runs great off schedule, but he's not yet very comfortable making plays outside of the pocket and throwing outside of the pocket. He's actually a lot more comfortable manipulating the pocket, which he does at an exceptionally high level, and throwing from inside the pocket. Now, it's inconsistent, but that's where he's more comfortable. What do you think of Richardson's game overall? And just my point there about the off-schedule quarterback being a trait, and my personal pet peeve with that always being used to represent quarterbacks whose game isn't necessarily that.
I think it's a great point, especially with Richardson, because I don't think Richardson is at all the quarterback that people have said he is. And I mean that in a good way. I like Richardson a lot, but I think it's to your point. Like, people just say, oh, big athlete with an arm, like, oh, he's another Josh Allen project. And it's like, he's not really that kind of player. He's more like, actually, it's funny that we were talking about Trey Lance so much. I think he's actually he's a really, really similar prospect to Trey Lance, actually, where he's this one-year starter who manages the pocket exceptionally well. His eyes and processing are like, my opinion is like, he gets it, and like, he can generally get his eyes where he needs to be. He'll keep them up. Like, he's not worried about getting pressured. He knows how to throw hot. It's just sometimes it takes that extra beat for him to like see it, and that can give him some issues. And I think that's really where a lot of his accuracy issues comes up. Is like he'll have to maybe move his feet at the last second or something, and it just completely throws him out of whack, and he just doesn't handle it very well. But like it's kind of like I said with Lance, where like you see the toolkit for this guy who can be an NFL pocket passer. It's just not quite refined yet. He needs a little bit of help. Somebody needs to mold the clay a little bit. And I think if he lands on the right team, that can absolutely happen. But then the out of the pocket stuff, I think you nailed it. Like he's an unbelievable runner outside the pocket. Like he will just torch you for 70 yards, like if he needs to. But he's not all that creative, like outside the pocket. Like I think he has the arm to like make certain throws when they're there. And I don't think he's a guy who forces the ball into like coverage that much and like is going to give you heart attacks. Like if anything, he actually throws the ball away almost too much, like to a fault. But like he protects the ball in a lot of ways. He doesn't really go for that crazy stuff. It's just, I guess the theory is like you chase the talent to do that. But like with Herbert, I think we've seen like, I mean, I love Justin Herbert. This is no knock, but like it's a lot harder to teach guys to be reckless than to like have a reckless guy and like be like, all right, let's settle it down a little bit. I think it's just really hard to get that into a guy. And I think with Richardson, like you're probably just never going to get a guy who like does insane stuff out of the pocket. Like he'll have some great throws and stuff, but he's not going to be like Josh Allen or Joe Burrow, where like his game is centered around the chaos. He's very much a quarterback who like wants the game to play the way it's supposed to be played.
It's just like, it's so interesting with him because I think where he differs a little bit from Trey Lance is I just think I like his arm a little bit better. I think he's got a way smooth delivery. I never go down the quarterback mechanics rabbit hole. That's too much for me. When we get
I've also stopped, so that's how you know you don't need to do it anymore. It's not worth it. I was never even a rotational athlete. It becomes very hard for me to like even imagine. Yeah, I'm not going down there. But in terms of just where his upper body is, like it's just more, I think, fluid and smooth in terms of how he throws the ball versus Trey Lance. It's what you talked about where his feet can get out of place. But that's where I feel like his pocket game isn't necessarily so unrefined because other than late safety rotations, which I think is just him needing to play more, when the picture is clear, like if a team, lines up in single high and plays spot drop cover 3, like he knows where to get to go with the ball. It's just about making sure he's disciplined enough in the pocket to be in the right position to throw the football accurately. And that's where I think his accuracy issues are different from Trey Lance's accuracy issues, which are different from Josh Allen's accuracy issues. Like to me, Josh Allen's accuracy issues were like he's a quarterback that just didn't know where he was throwing the ball. So he was just throwing the spot. Like, sometimes it ended up in the right spot, sometimes it didn't. But like I thought his improvement in accuracy was more about not, hey, Josh Allen can now hit, if you and I were playing catch, he can now hit us 10 times. It was more Josh Allen actually knows where he's supposed to aim to throw the ball to. And his accuracy issues, on the other hand, to me are more just a product of his body can just get very, very undisciplined inside of the pocket. So like Brady's the best example, right, of this, right, of always being in a position to throw no matter where he moves inside the pocket. Richardson, because I feel like it's also a product of how gifted he is because his arm's so loose, he can kind of flick it out no matter what position he's in. Like, I feel like his body sometimes, like his feet, sometimes his base aren't under him or his feet are too close together. And then when he goes to throw, he just doesn't have the perfect base to throw the ball. And I feel like that affects his accuracy. And then with Lance, I thought it was a little bit of mixture that he is actually just a little bit where if you and I were standing in front of each other, Trey Lance might go 7 for 10 and just have one that gets away from him. So I did think they were all a little bit different there. Yeah, I think that's a good point with Lance. Like Lance, too, had a much longer delivery than Anthony Richardson does. And they actually kind of miss in different ways for that reason. Like to me, Lance a lot more often, I think you're going to see he throws like low and he's going to end up low because he just has such a longer over the top release.
Right.
Kind of ends up spiking the ball at the ground. Like when guys with that throwing motion miss, that's how they're going to miss. Whereas like Richardson is actually a lot like Cam and Lamar, where they have very, very low releases, but it's very quick and it's like a very compact low release. Guys that have that release are like the ball's going to end up shooting out and up on them a lot. And like, I think you see that a lot with Richardson. Like some of those seam balls he was throwing, like they would just miss by like 5 yards because he was having that issue. Like sometimes the crossers he was throwing had the same problem. Like he would just like he's just gonna miss by 5 yards over your head because of the way he throws. But I think, like we said, it mostly goes back to just his feet. And like to me, the reason I think it's fixable is like you can tell he's trying to move to the right spot. It's just a matter of like his feet aren't in the right spot. Like his body like frame is where it needs to be. It's just that his feet are not like angled and set the way that they need to be. But like I think that can be teachable with experience, because like the fact that he already kind of clearly gets where he needs to move and how to keep himself clean, that is like a really good baseline. It's just a matter of like, hey man, don't step on your toes. Like don't step on your own feet. Like give yourself some room here.
Not to mention he's one of the freakiest athletes I think I've ever seen. Like ever. Yeah. And he's one of the most. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, which actually the funny thing about that is we talked about he's an incredible runner off script. Like when he gets out to the pocket, he's an unbelievable scrambler and like runner. I actually don't think he's like that good of a designed runner. It's almost like the Lance thing where like his vision sometimes, especially between the tackles, is like, just run forward, bro. Like you're 240 pounds. Like just crush this guy. He just doesn't do it sometimes.
Like that's where I get the Justin Fields comparison. That's where I get the Justin Fields comparison as a runner. Yeah. And it's interesting because he doesn't have the two best I remember in college that actually like really ran right, other than Lamar, obviously, was Hurts and Malik Willis. Mm-hmm. Like Malik Willis was just really thick. He wasn't necessarily the fastest guy, but he just had a great way of knowing where to run. Mm-hmm. And then he had great contact balance. And you're absolutely right about Richardson. I actually never thought about that. He's not exactly
he's just like not great. A natural runner. It's weird. Like you would think when you're a absolute monster athlete that you would like naturally you would think like, oh, this guy for 6 years has probably just ran like this. But he just like, it's really only when he's off script and he's got space. You condense it a little bit and he's like, I don't know if I want to do this.
So I've been reading obviously a little bit of your work. I didn't want to read too much because I wanted to be surprised here, but I know he's not your quarterback one, but is he your favorite quarterback in this draft? If I had to say one,
yes, he's by far my favorite to watch and like my favorite idea of a player. Because like when you watch all these guys, you kind of have an idea of like, okay, if everything works out, what is the best version of this guy? The best idea of Richardson is like literally the second best quarterback in the league. Like, is he going to get there? Probably not, obviously, because like a lot of things would have to go right for him or any prospect to get to that level. But like just the thought of what he might be like with the right team is just like it's so much fun. He could be so insane. And so that's
where do you want him to go?
I wanted him to go to Carolina. It seems like they are very dead set on CJ Stroud, which is fine. Like CJ Stroud's my number one quarterback anyway, so like I totally get it. Other than that, I think it's a little bit tricky. I really hope it's not Indianapolis because I have a lot of issues with that team currently, but like I just don't trust Chris Ballard at all. And also I think that offensive line is horrendous. So I don't know. I once it seemed like Carolina was out, I had stopped giving it enough thought, and I was just hoping for the best.
Yeah, Carolina is interesting because I think when you make that kind of trade, I think most people would say that you have to take the safest quarterback available at one. And I think Bryce Young is the best quarterback in this draft. I know we disagree there. We'll probably talk about that in a little. But CJ Stroud to me is that pick 100%. And it seems like people are saying they traded up. It's kind of turned into a San Francisco at 3 situation. Mm-hmm. And I would not recommend anybody else to follow that process of going up, not knowing who you're taking, all of that. Like, to me in the NFL, when you trade up, you're trading up for a player, never for a pick. You have to have a guy in mind. And so, yeah, I don't know what's going on, but to me, this should be CJ Stroud.
I think 100%. Like, if I don't know, in some random scenario, like if you trade up to like 3, but you don't know which quarterbacks are supposed to go ahead of you, like, okay, maybe you're trading for the pick and just hoping that one falls. But like you trade to 1, like there's nobody's stealing anything from you. You know what you're going up for. And like, I guess it's possible that they're not 100%, but like, I think it's more than likely that they have their guy. Like, that's just how it is.
So let's talk about CJ Stroud. I think he's probably one of the most advanced like passers we have probably had come out. Like, as long as I've actually been like genuinely following the draft, like learning about these guys, learning how to watch these guys, and trying to create somewhat of a reasonable process to have like a fair evaluation. I can't remember. I don't even think maybe Burrow, but like I've never seen somebody that was consistently able to layer the ball, throw with this much touch, consistent accuracy, throw over people, around people. Like his ability to throw is like out of this world. The question with him, I think people always go to the pressure stuff. I think that is a little bit overblown and overrated, especially when you go back and watch 2021. In 2022, it is inconsistent, but in 2021, he shows you that he can handle muddy pockets. He can, get hot when pressure's coming. Like he can do all the things that's necessary. My biggest question actually with CJ Stroud is I felt like he doesn't climb clean pockets like at all. Like he just hands back at depth in clean pockets and is great when you have the pristine protection of Ohio State. But the reality of the modern day NFL football, right, is that protection is just not good. Every quarterback basically has to handle bad protection because the level of defensive line play to offensive line play, it's not even close. Every team has like 2 premier level edge rushers. Half the teams in the league have 2 good offensive line. Most don't. And so offensive linemen, excuse me. And so when that's the case, I guess that's my number one worry with Stroud. It's the fact that he just doesn't seem habitually like processed to climb the pocket. I don't know if that's something that you do instinctively or naturally. What is your process on evaluating that? Is that something that worries you about Stroud? And overall, like, what is your long-term outlook on Stroud? I think there's some ceiling stuff pushed out because of the Jared Goff comparison, which I'm going to push back with if you don't. But I think the overall outlook of him is a little bit interesting because I do think for him to become a high-level player, he has to be able to consistently climb the pocket.
I think that's a really good point. And like for me, it's kind of just about my biggest problem with Stroud is not that he like crumbles under pressure. I think the biggest issue is kind of, I think this is why he doesn't climb the pocket all that much. I think he kind of just has like getting his body to do what he wants to do when he's in tight spaces just doesn't work. Like I remember in the Wisconsin game, I mean, he was like 19 for 21 in that game or something insane. But there was one throw I remember where he like did kind of get crowded in front of him and he just like couldn't drive on the ball the way that he wanted to. And I think that is kind of the issue for him. And I think maybe because he's so lanky, like he kind of has that issue where like, it's actually funny you brought up Jared Goff. Like I think Jared Goff has the same issue in some ways. Like Jared Goff is very willing to stand in the pocket.
Yeah, he's
but
tough.
Because he's so lanky, sometimes it's actually hard for him to operate when he climbs in the pocket. It's like a very like tricky dynamic for him. Where I feel a little bit better about it with Stroud is like he at least has the option to get outside the pocket. And up until the Georgia game, and the Michigan game, I had some concerns about like how consistently he was going to actually be able to create outside of the pocket. And like, he obviously has a good enough arm. He's obviously a good enough athlete. It was just, I feel like for a lot of 2021 and a lot of 2022, it was a lot of just like, he gets outside the pocket, he finds the dude in the flat. And it's like, okay, that's a fine play that keeps you on schedule. But like at a certain point, if you're going to be a top 7 NFL quarterback, like you got to have something more. And I think he finally showed that in the last 2 games of the season, and that was really encouraging. So like that kind of erased the biggest question I had with him.
Right.
I think for the most part, he's a pretty clean quarterback prospect. Like I don't think his ceiling is bad. I just think like he doesn't quite have the ceiling of like a top 5 pick typically. You know what I mean? Like I don't think he's Trevor. I don't think he's Justin Fields in those respects. But I think like the floor is about as high as I've seen in a long time. And that feels weird to say of an Ohio State quarterback, but like kind of what you were saying with his processing and understanding of like, it's actually the opposite of what we talked about with Jimmy, where I was like, Jimmy doesn't know how to throw defender leverage. He doesn't know how to add touch in certain areas. He doesn't know how to throw low when he needs to. Stroud is as good as I've seen that since like Burrow comes to mind and like Deshaun Watson comes to mind. And like for prospects, that's it. Those are the only guys that I remember who had an unbelievable process for how to do that with ball placement. And I think Stroud is right up there. And like if anything is going to be his secret weapon in the NFL, it's going to be that he finds the right club for every hit. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. He's really an amazing passer. He's like amazing. And the way he threw it at the combine was, I don't put a lot into that, but when you see
when it looks that good,
like CJ Stroud, yeah, it's hard not to put something into it. It's interesting because you brought up the Goff comp. Actually, I think he's more like Geno than Goff. I think he's got a lot of Geno qualities, and I would say Geno is similar in the sense that he's got athleticism and size that could be used to create more plays off schedule. He's just so willing to play on schedule and on time. And I think maybe not as powerful an arm as Geno, though the ball looked like it was coming out with even more pop at the combine. So I wonder if it was like a Deshaun Watson thing where he just wasn't ripping it as much in college as he could have.
He just doesn't have to.
Yeah, right. And so that's where I would compare him to Geno. That was probably the best comp I could come up with. But in terms of ceiling, I don't necessarily have a concern when we're talking about the number one overall pick because honestly, I feel like he could become so elite at playing on time and on schedule that it doesn't matter. Like that's how I feel about it.
I mean, that was like the theory with Burrow, right? Like that. Right. That's I guess more
it actually applies to Herbert.
Yeah. Like I think my thing is just like I would still take him first overall. To be clear, like I would still. He's the best quarterback of the class. I think he's like a top 10 prospect in the class, no matter how you dice it. It's just I guess like when I'm thinking of typical first overall pick, I'm thinking of like just an absolute rocket launcher arm, and you run like a 4.3, like a. I mean, like
Kyler.
Trevor didn't run that much, but like Kyler, something like that, Cam, like where you are just out of this world, freak show athlete and a pretty good quarterback. Whereas like Stroud, I think Timor is like, I think basically my comparison for Stroud in general has been like, I think he walks into the league as an athletic version of Jared Goff. I think if everything turns out right for him, he's like Dak Prescott. I love Dak a lot. So like, that's very high praise. I think he's like a top 7 quarterback. I think he's incredible. So like that to me is like the general, I think, way that Stroud would be good because Dak kind of like Stroud is like, he's very comfortable in the pocket for the most part, knows how to move around. He's going to get through all his reads for the most part. Like he's probably already a little more accurate than Dak. Like Dak will have like 3 just bizarre misses a game that Stroud doesn't really have. Like Stroud doesn't really miss like that. But I think they're like similarly physically talented. So like, that's kind of the path I'm hoping for with CJ Stroud. And honestly, with Reich, like assuming they draft him, I have pretty good confidence they can figure that out.
Right. And it'll be, I think, interesting to watch. Obviously, with CJ Stroud, probably one of the most polarizing quarterback prospects ever is Bryce Young, right? If you watch the player without knowing that he's small, which unfortunately it's impossible to miss. You would think like I think it's the best quarterback like in terms of film I've ever seen. Like I mean that. And I mean that with Joe Burrow, like really like I think only because I think his arm is a little bit better than Joe Burrow's. But like the size is a real question mark and he does get hit. Like it's not like he's a player that's like Kyler. Like Kyler never got touched. So, like, how do you question the size? Nobody ever was hitting the guy, but, like, he gets hit. What is your outlook on Bryce Young as a player? Obviously, I just dropped some very, very effusive praise there. You seem to disagree with it. Why do you? And how concerned are you about the size? And ultimately, I guess the landing spot is going to be Carolina or Houston. And how do you think he fits there?
I mean, I still think his tape is really, really good. So that, like, my shock was more just like, to me, Trevor's like he's like Trevor to me as a prospect is so in like his own realm almost that like I can't even like process putting somebody in there. And then I guess Burrow is like in that next tier too, and I think Burrow was probably a little bit better than Young. But like the film,
I think Burrow was better, but I just think Young has more cool plays.
Oh, I mean, he does. Like, Young's cool, especially because you're calibrating for, like, obviously playing at that LSU team, they had, like, a billion incredible players. So, like, he wasn't pulling all the weight. Obviously, he was doing a lot. Whereas, like, Bryce Young on this Alabama team is, for the most part, doing everything, especially in 2022. I think with Bryce, like, I think, to me, my biggest concern, like, it really is all just size. Like, I think as a player, he's incredible. His accuracy is amazing. His arm is, like, pretty good. It's not special or anything, but like it's pretty good. It's going to be over the NFL baseline. He's obviously like a nice athlete. I think his processing, like I think pre-snap he can be a little wonky sometimes. Like I think if you show him pressure looks, he kind of just like vibes out and does whatever he wants and is like,
Yeah.
I'll just leave the pocket. It's like, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And so like that concerns me a little bit given he's not like an elite athlete, but I think like he's smart enough that he could figure it out. You could get him to settle down and he would be fine in that regard because his post snap stuff is for the most part, like he's really, really good. Like he's pretty willing to stay in the pocket for a guy who's short. And he, for the most part, does like a pretty good job of getting through everything. I think sometimes he can get a little like he's really holding out for one thing to be open and like he'll kind of wish it open. But like there are times where even great quarterbacks are going to do that. Like Joe Burrow does that all the time. But like he's so good at other stuff that like it doesn't matter. Like sometimes the quarterback knows where their bread is buttered. And I think Young is like smart enough to figure that aspect of it out. I think my biggest thing is just he's the smallest quarterback in the NFL instantly, and it's not close. Like Kyler is also short, but Kyler is like a very legitimate over 200 pounds, like pretty clearly a thick, muscled player.
Yeah, Bryce Kyler's Young, not a comparison too, right?
No, like no, Kyler. No, yeah, I'm not comparing him to Kyler. I'm just talking about like the size. Like I think it's they're.
I think the offense
sort of
matters
similar,
too. Right? Because like Kyler's offense just ensures that he's on the perimeter more.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also protecting him from, whereas Bryce Young, to me, like the thing is like for short quarterbacks, if we could ever throw out the Drew Brees comparison, this is the one in terms of like how he's able to create angles to throw the ball, his subtlety in terms of how he manipulates the pocket. The fact that I'm 98% sure that some throws he makes blind, because I'm not exactly 100% sure how he sees it, but he still makes the throw.
There's one I remember versus LSU where I'm pretty sure he was throwing blind.
Yeah,
it didn't matter.
I think we're talking about the same play there. So I think all of that is included, but the size is just such an outlier and enigma, and I think that's why, like, as much as I just told you all these things about Bryce Young, I think Stroud should be the first overall pick. Just because there's something way more steady with all parts of Stroud's game. It's Young is just weird to me because if you said he was 6'3", 215, like we're talking about a pretty great draft with two all-star, no questions, basically quarterbacks.
He'd be Burrow if he was that size. Right. He would just be Joe Burrow, like for the most part, like But he's not like, and that's like my big thing. Yeah.
If I had to ask you one quarterback that nobody's talking about that you think is getting slept on, who would that be for you?
I mean, frankly, I don't really like any of the day 3 players that much.
Really?
I kind of like, this is going to sound like so true to my, like the type of quarterback I always fall for, but like, I kind of like Tanner McKee from Stanford. Like his stats are atrocious because that offense is like embarrassing. But I think when they actually ran a lot of the like pro style stuff that they're used to, instead of getting in 10 personnel and running RPOs for whatever godforsaken reason, he actually looked like a Kirk Cousins, Matt Schaub variant type where like the arm is pretty good. I think he has a pretty decent job of understanding like how to put touch on certain throws. His pocket management is like pretty good. Granted, that's all he has because he won't leave it. So like that's the issue you're running into. But for me, I can see the path where he is an acceptable NFL starter just between his arm, his size, the way that he processes, the way that he understands touch. With all of the other day 2 and 3 guys, I just like they need a miracle, in my opinion. Like it just, for one reason or another, like Haener is actually like, he's kind of like a discount version of Bryce Young, but like I'm already concerned about Bryce Young. And then Jake Haener is like the 5th round version of that. It's like, how excited can I really be about that? I don't want to necessarily hate on
just a quarterback watch, like in terms of the anticipation and the timing, Haener might be one of the best watches in the draft.
He's a he's a real he actually reminds me of Brett Rippon at Boise State, where it's like, I know you're a real quarterback, but it's physically not all there, and it really sucks.
Right. And it's like the Brock Purdy comparisons with him, I think, are interesting because I was like all for them at the beginning. In some ways, I understand them. But the athleticism between the two is such a stark difference. And I feel like the athleticism is the one thing that all of us have discounted till now with Brock Purdy that kind of gave him a chance when he started to make us think that he was more than just, hey, this is a 7th round fill-in player. Like, oh, hey, actually, no, it turns out he's athletic enough to, compete. And Haener is slow-footed.
Yeah.
Slow-footed.
Yeah,
So
Haener is very like, he looks like he should be able to get outside the pocket, but you watch him try to do it and it's like not working.
he's like running in quicksand, man.
Yes, dude. There are so many times where I've seen him try to spin out, and it's like you didn't go anywhere, bud. Like you're
And he
done
doesn't.
instantly.
This is the most interesting part to me. He doesn't look like somebody that should run that slow.
No, like he's like a frail, like he kind of looks like he should
Yeah,
be bouncy, and he's just not. Like he just doesn't
slow.
have it, man. He just doesn't
Yeah,
have it.
I like. So I was saying earlier that a while ago that I kind of like DTR of the
I actually
guys.
don't
Just
mind him. I will say that, yeah.
yeah. Just because if we're talking about like starter traits, and then I saw like
Mhm.
Chris Sims had him as like the 5th ranked quarterback in the draft, and I was like, whoa, take a break for a second. Like I like DTR,
Yeah.
but I was thinking more like, hey, he could be like Tyrod Taylor with
Mhm.
and cannon for an arm, but yeah, not the 5th ranked quarterback in the draft. It's interesting. If I had to ask you for who's the quarterback that you are higher on than most, who would that be?
I mean, it probably is McKee, because I would take him like my comparison for what he is as a player kind of is like Jacoby Brissett. And Jacoby Brissett, I think went at like the end of the 3rd round. And so like that's probably where I would think about a guy like him, which I think is probably higher than most people. In terms of the top guys, I guess it's Richardson because I have him quarterback too. And like I would spend a top 5 pick on him. Like obviously he's a very risky prospect, but there are just certain traits that I'm willing to bet on, and I think he has a lot of them. So it would probably be him. Other than that, no, I think that might be it. I think it's probably AR being QB2, and then McKee is my quarterback 5 because I just don't really like anybody outside the top 4 that much.
I think that's fair. I'm
Mhm.
surprised that you don't like some of these other guys. I have a weird like I liked. I mean, he had a terrible Senior Bowl, but like Jaron Hall has like a very sweet motion. He throws the ball real smooth. It's nice to watch.
Hall is
Like,
tough, man. I want to
yeah,
like him. I like because I know what you're talking about. Like the way he throws, it's like probably some of the cleanest outside of like Stroud, just in terms of like his stroke, like the way that he throws is just so
yeah.
beautiful. Like he's clearly an athlete. His arm is really good. He has some sick throws outside the pocket, but it's just like
He's 25.
he's 25 and
Yeah,
like some of the in the pocket stuff doesn't really feel there. Like his processing is a little like I was like, if you were like 22 and had like only 2 years of starting or something, I'd be like, maybe I'll flip the coin here. But already 25, like it's a little like I don't know.
yeah.
We've probably already seen you peak.
It's interesting because his traits from just a trait standpoint aren't that dissimilar from the BYU quarterback that was picked
They're not.
in the top 5. Yeah.
They're not. It's just, Jaron Hall, 1, he's older, and 2, didn't get to play a fake schedule. So maybe if he got to play a fake schedule, we'd be talking about him in the first
Hey,
round.
I fell for the fake schedule.
I mean, I
Though,
kind of did
so
too. I still thought he
yeah.
was like QB3 or no 4. But I mean, I still had a first round grade on him, so like I still fell for it. But yeah.
Last question for you because I don't want to keep you too long, but this is I think I know the answer to this question, so it kind of works perfectly. I think into talking about the one quarterback that we haven't talked about, but who is the one quarterback that you are lower on than most?
So I think I know who you are segueing this to, but I think I
Yeah.
have a different one that I'm much lower on.
Okay.
I'm not even sure Hendon Hooker is draftable. Like
I
he
agree.
is basically a fake prospect. And like that to me is like the fact that he's been getting even some late first round buzz, or I think like Bucky Brooks or Matt Miller said something like if he didn't have the knee, he would be a first round pick. And like that
I
to me
saw
is
that
just
too.
I just don't know like what we're looking at. Like I think Tennessee runs the fakest offense in college football. And like we said that before, kind of about like air raid offenses, but like this is very different. Like the air raid is like a simplified passing offense in a lot of ways, but like it's still real concepts for like you're still running real offense. It's just like very repetitive and like kind of simplified. The spacing is helping you a little bit in college, but like Tennessee is legitimately like they are abusing the college hashes in a way that does not exist in the NFL. to a degree that like can never exist in the NFL. So he just has like 80% of his throws are just like clean pocket, one step drop, throwing a glance route, or like throwing a hitch route, or like even the way they run hitch routes, they run them all the way back to the line of scrimmage. And it's like, that's like that's like training wheels quarterbacking. Like this is not real quarterbacking. So he's just a prospect that like in the 6th round, like take a flyer, like sure, he's talented enough. He can run and like his arm is fine. And he's shown some decent accuracy over the middle. So like 6th, 7th round, sure, take the flyer. The fact that he's being talked about as like a top 50 pick or something is just it's bizarre to me.
Yeah, so he was one I just forgot to watch for whatever reason. Like I just never watched him. And then so I watched him recently and I saw he'd been getting hype. It was not only Bucky Brooks, Chris Sims had him as like the 3rd rated quarterback and all of that. So it was like, all right, cool. Let me, watch this guy. I've watched all these different quarterbacks and I didn't get it either. The first DM I sent you, funnily enough, was last year during the draft process. I asked you how you evaluate somebody like Matt Corral, right?
Corral, yeah.
Matt Corral had like I just talked about. I'm a sucker for quick release, very smooth motion that like looks very aesthetically pretty. Had control of the ball, and then Matt Corral was also like a real like athlete. Like he was actually like a very good athlete. So if we were stacking like traits, right? Like Matt Corral had some like very decent traits, except he played in an offense that didn't even let us know if he knows how to play quarterback or not. Well, turns out first year at Carolina, he didn't know how to play quarterback. Hendon Hooker is kind of like the same thing to me.
Yes.
And even for a quarterback that like has so many wide open throws, he misses high.
Yes, dude, it's so I think all the Anthony Richardson accuracy stuff is completely fair. Obviously, like he misses plenty of passes, but like the fact that we haven't said that about Hooker, like the fact that he kind of gets a pass for it because he has like 67 completion percentage or whatever, because that offense is ridiculous. Like it's very clearly like what are people watching? Like I just don't understand. Like he's like you said, like his accuracy is kind of all over the place. He's just and I will say too, like I have whatever the opposite of a bias is for players from these offenses. Like this Baylor, like Tennessee style, like we're going to abuse the hashes and just run a billion RPOs and like everything is going to be to the wide side of the field. It's just not real football to me. And so like these types of players that come from this offense, like Matt Corral last year, I did not like him at all for basically those reasons. Like he was a good athlete. He had an arm, like his release was so pretty. He was actually pretty accurate for the most part, but like that offense, it's such like a mental block for me that until somebody breaks the mold, I can't do it.
So before I let you go, I do got to ask you about that last quarterback prospect that we didn't end up touching on. I think he is one of the most interesting quarterback prospects. I feel like I've said that about all 4 of these guys. All 4 of these guys are interesting. And then I think Will Levis adds interesting upon the interesting. What do you think of Will Levis? I know that, reading your article before we came on here, you don't really like Will Levis.
He's weird because like I don't actually hate him. He's just I do have him quarterback 4. I think he's just misunderstood in a way. Like I think people see him and kind of like the archetype thing you were talking about earlier. Like people see this guy who's like 6'3", 220, fairly good athlete. Like he's not great, but like he's a fairly decent athlete. Absolute cannon of an arm. And I think people just instantly go, "Oh, he can be Matthew Stafford." And it's like, well, that is pretty generous. Like he would kind of need a leap or 2 in terms of like the way he processes, the way he sees the field, the way he manages the pocket. To me, he's actually a lot more like Ryan Tannehill, which I think is like a fine middle late first round quarterback. Like you can take him in that range and like you can get acceptable quarterback play out of them, because I think like Tannehill, Levis is, I don't think he's an idiot, but I think he kind of is a little like, he kind of needs open windows to be there, or like it takes him a little bit to process. It's almost like the Lance thing where like he kind of is going to be on that things take a little bit of time, and like he's a very confident thrower, or like he's aggressive at times, but like there are just times where he just doesn't see it correctly and it takes him a minute. And I think his processing and decision making can be pretty inconsistent. And that took Tannehill a long time to figure out. And then eventually he just figured out, I'm just going to throw over the middle and that's all I'm going to do. And it's going to work. And I think that like that should be more the trajectory, or like a more realistic trajectory for Will Levis. So like, I think he can still be a competent starting quarterback. I just think when people look at him, the way he's built, the way his arm is, and go, oh, he's Matthew Stafford, I'm just like, it just feels a little rich.
Yeah, it's funny. We talked about Jimmy Garoppolo at the beginning. His process is Jimmy Garoppolo all
Yes,
over
actually.
again. It's Jimmy
His arm is just
Garoppolo.
better.
It's way better. And
Yeah.
he's huge. And I think that there is real like equity to the fact that he's so willing to stand in there like a Tannehill, you said, stand tall in there, take hits. Like, yeah.
Yes, that exact trait is like why I have the comparison, because like Tannehill, unbelievably willing to stand in there, unbelievably willing to take a shot, not scared to throw over the middle. He will not move in the pocket. Like he doesn't like understand how to help himself. And I think Levis actually has some of that to him where he just like doesn't, he's willing to stay in there and that's great, but he just doesn't know how to help himself.
Yes.
Hopefully he can develop that, but like I don't know.
I think that latter part is kind of the most important part with Levis when they talk about Stafford. Because we can talk about the arm. I think Stafford's arm was bigger, but okay, fine.
His arm is like different.
If you want to say fine, Levis's arm is on that thing. But the thing Stafford has is one, I think Stafford had way quicker feet. Like Levis is fast. I don't know how quick Levis is in terms of being able to move within the confined space of the pocket. And like the reason that particular thing is scary to me is if I had to pick the two biggest quarterback busts, in my opinion, other than Zach Wilson in the last 5 years, Dwayne Haskins and Josh Rosen, I thought that was their two biggest issues. They just couldn't move away from people that were very close to them, bodies around them inside the pocket, too slow-footed. Levis is not comparable to those guys. I think he's just better than both of them. But like the fact that he can't really do that, like, or he just doesn't do that, it scares me. And then the second one is there is no, and this is kind of like a new thing. I guess it wasn't a big deal before, but I think arm angle creativity matters a lot in terms of being able to change your delivery. There's Levis, for whatever reason, it's weird because Levis is one of the strongest armed, most natural throwers I've seen. But it seems like his arm is like tight, whereas like Richardson has like a very live, floppy arm where like he can naturally like navigate different slots. Levis's arm seems to be so tight that it's that one rigid motion like every time. And like for a guy that spends so much time with people around him throwing, like that's scary to me, let alone like this panicky Jimmy Garoppolo aspect, throwing the ball up for grabs aspect of him too. That's like a completely different part of it. Like those two things are what like really scare me when you're talking about his archetype being Stafford, because those are two of Stafford's like best qualities.
Right. And I think when you look at even the other three top quarterbacks in this class, like you see, even if their feet get messed up or if they're outside the pocket or they're on the move, like blah, 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 even if the ball doesn't actually get where it needs to go, you can see their body like clearly trying to adjust and do what it needs to do to make it work from whatever platform they're on.
Right.
Like you said with Levis, like he's got what he's got. Like he's going to throw how he's going to throw. And like you even see it like in quick game. Like I think his quick game footwork is a disaster, which like I think it was worse in 2022. So like it could be just a coaching problem. But I don't think it was ever that good. And when his feet are bad, like he you can tell some guys, like when their feet get bad, like they kind of can correct it with their arm a little bit. Levis just doesn't have that. So like, if his feet are gone, he just is like completely whiffing and he'll throw a speed out into the dirt. And it's like, bro, like get it a little bit closer. Like, come on here. And so that's another problem with me. I think the arm slot thing is like a really big point because at the end of the day, like quarterback is literally just, it's a problem solving position. I mean, football is a problem-solving sport, but like quarterback is everything you do is a problem. Pre-snap, post-snap, where to throw the ball, like we were talking about with Stroud, like how to place it around defenders. Like everything you do is problem-solving. Having a different arm slot is very much part of that. Being able to move in the pocket is very much part of that, and Levis just doesn't really have that. And I don't think he's that good outside the pocket, which is another concern. Like it's almost like the Stroud thing where it's like, or it's more like Richardson actually, where it's like, I know you have the arm to do it, but it just like it's not the creativity like Bryce Young has. It's just not really there. It's more like you just have the arm to do it sometimes. But yeah.
But at least with Richardson is the latter example that you talked about, right? Where when he's getting out there, it might not always be accurate, but like there's an attempt to like
Yeah.
switch
You
his
can
body or
see
get it.
him
Yeah,
trying to get
right.
his body right, whereas like Levis just misses, and it's like, okay.
It could be the injuries too, right? Like I found
Yeah.
out later that he had whatever issues on his left side of his body, so that's why he struggled throwing left. Their offense was
Mhm.
a mess. They had more protection bust than probably any offense
Dude,
I've seen in
it's
college in a
bad.
while. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like and it's like stuff that I can't even put on the quarterback because I like
Mhm.
some of the protection stuff, it looks like he doesn't even know he's gonna be hot. Like he's reading
Yeah.
the concept side and he's just getting blindside whacked.
Yeah,
So
some
yeah.
of that stuff, like, you do have to, like that's why, like, I don't hate him because I still think there is a degree of, like you even saw it in 2021 where, like, it was more stable. It was like you saw flashes and, like, you saw him looking fairly normal. Like, it was still kind of inconsistent, but, like, you saw him looking fairly normal. In 2022, like, all of the circumstances around him, like losing his best receivers, like the offensive line getting a lot worse, coaching getting a lot worse, he basically looked like the worst parts of himself constantly, which is like why I think 2021 is like a better judge of his evaluation or like a better way to judge him. I just still think that in 2021 he was Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah, which is honestly still a good player. Like
Mhm. Yeah.
I think he's still generally a top 15 pick.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, he's definitely an interesting watch. Well, Derek, I really appreciate your time. This was awesome. We're able to talk some draft. We obviously talked some Niners quarterback situation. You are obviously now transitioning. You were just writing at Football Outsiders. You are now going to be writing elsewhere. But till then, can you let everybody know where they can find you and find all this awesome work you do on quarterbacks?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. This was a blast. Anytime I get to rip for like an hour and a half on quarterbacks, I'm very happy. So always happy to do it. You can find me on Twitter at QBClass, QBKLASS. I do still do work for Bleacher Report. I do all our offensive skill players for our draft project. So quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, all that jazz. Yeah, that's where you can find my stuff. And then I will be releasing my quarterback charting of the prospects within like the next 2 weeks. I'm for sure gonna have 5. I'll have the top 4. I'll have Hooker. If I can find all the games I need of McKee, I will also have McKee, and then that'll probably be it. So in the next couple of weeks, you can look for that.
Well, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Derek, for joining. Please like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you all tomorrow with Larry Krueger. Have a great rest of your day.